Hello, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 11 of Ludonarrative Dissidents. In this episode, we'll be talking about Dread, a very popular and influential indie horror role-playing game. And with me, as always, are my good friends and co-hosts, Greg Stolzes and James Wallace. Greg, why don't you, let's just dive right into it. Greg, can you explain what is Dread?
For what does it do? I said it reinvents horror suspense gaming in the clearest, cleanest, most viscerally apt way. It is brilliant. It is a stroke of genius, and I don't use the word genius lightly. I find it hard to think of a more perfect marriage of subject matter and form in rules, because the way Dread works, you have a Jenga tower, and anytime you want to do something hard or where you might be at risk, you pull a block and you put it on top. And it is very simple and it is very easy to understand. The difference between characters is that some characters will get to do the things they are good at without pulling it, and others might have to make multiple pulls to do things they are bad at. Mm-hmm. But by and large, it is a way of infusing this skill game that definitely has a ticking time limit on it. No matter how deft you are, there is only so high the tower can rise before it topples. And when it topples, your character is removed. So, it does what it says on the cover. It produces dread because when you are making that draw, your heart will hammer in a way that it does not when you are rolling your percentile dice in Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, or Unknown Armies, because it is this very intimate feedback between the tremble of your hands, the haptic connection between yourself and the object of your doom, that it really makes very immediate the sensation of risk. I love it.
Yeah, it's startlingly groundbreaking. Not least the fact that it wasn't actually published till 2005, but I know it existed in 2002 because the two designers, Nat Barmore and Epidia, pitched it to me at Hogshead Publishing as a possible new style game at Gen Con 2002, and I turned them down. Two reasons. First of all, I thought it was a gimmick. And secondly, what I was actually doing at Gen Con 2002 was trying to sell Hogshead rather than buy new projects. I didn't tell them that at the time, but I think it later became clear. But the thing is, you describe Dread to someone and they go, yeah, I see that, maybe it's a single session thing. Maybe you play it once or twice. And it's it's way smarter than I realized, sitting in whatever crappy restaurant that was in Milwaukee 20 years ago. It's really smart. It, as Greg says, it utterly viscerally captures the suspense of a good piece of horror literature or a horror movie or something like that. And when the tower falls, what it means is your character, the person who knocked it over, their character leaves the narrative at that point. They don't necessarily die, but they leave the narrative. So when that happens, it is nobody's fault but yours. You can't blame the dice. You can't blame the GM. You can't blame the capriciousness of whoever wrote the scenario. It's your fault. And that hits hard. It is a brilliant piece of design. It is published as a 160-page book, slightly more, 172, I would guess. It's interesting because I think Dread the book is actually two things. First of all, it is the description of how to use this brilliant core mechanic as essentially the mechanic for a horror game, and then it's a really good manual for how to run horror games. There's an awful lot of stuff which, again, even in 2005, let alone 2002, there wasn't an awful lot explaining how you do this well, how how you create the atmosphere of horror, how you bring the players in, how you make sure that everyone's having a good time. It's a really smart piece of writing. It's I can quibble with some of the editorial stuff, the order in which things are explained, but generally, it's a very impressive piece of work.
Though, of course, one thing that could be improved is the use of the future conditional tense. And I love this book, this game, and this design, but that one flaw, it's got that flaw bad. It's not just here and there. It's like every page. It's like going on a date with a beautiful woman who's smart and has a great sense of humor and then hits you in the forehead with a hatchet.
It's very stark, like a scenario in Dread, perhaps.
Yeah,
Epidiah Ravachol and Nat Woodell, Barmore are the authors. I found a blog from Epidiah who talks about, he started working on Dread in 2000. He started working on it years before it was published. And it won the 2006 Gold Innie for innovation, and certainly has become one of the most popular role-playing games to talk outside of D&D. Like, oh, here's, it's one of those textbook examples of a game. Look, role-playing games are so much more than just Dungeons and Dragons. Look, for example, you could use a Jenga tower.
Well, this is, as I was reading it again, and it's been nice for me to prepare for an episode on something that it's not the first time I've read it, and that's something I'm deeply familiar with. And as I was looking over it, I'm like, wow, there is a tension between its success as a creative project, as an inspired endeavor. It's 10 out of 10. Its success as a commercial project is not that great because, what remains to sell? If you look at this in the crassest, coarsest, most barbaric capitalist perspective, this is a terrible failure. You can't put out a source book for this. You have a set of genius rules that could fit on a business card. And once people have internalized how it works, they don't need to purchase anything else. You buy this book, and you could produce a bottomless stream of games forever without ever having any help that you have to pay for. So its very success is its poison. I compared it earlier. I was talking about this on my freelance call. I'm like, it's like curing cancer. It sounds great, but once you sell someone the cure for cancer, they are never going to buy the cure for cancer from you again.
Yeah, but then there's always more people who have cancer, and I think that's Dread. Is they just keep selling copies. It is probably top 100,
and
top
I hope
20.
so, because God, what it does is amazing.
Yeah.
So
It's really, the granularity is incredibly coarse. The rules are basically, you use a Jenga tower and literally you are playing Jenga. There's no, they don't dress it up with anything else. They don't get you to write on the blocks. You make a straight Jenga tower as described in the rules of Jenga. And on your turn, if you have a task to do, you pull out one block and put it on the top. And then if it's a difficult one, or if you want to, you can pull out another block and put it on the top as well. You are literally playing Jenga. They have not meddled with that at all.
There are a couple specific things for Dread in that the game is actually based on a larger player count, where the default number of players is 5. And if you have fewer than 5 players, you actually have to make pulls before you start the game in order to get the tower going.
Which, that seemed like an interesting... That popped out at me, because I'm like, oh, so... it's considered an advantage to have fewer players, because in most games it's like, okay, if this is a dungeon for first level characters, probably if you have 10 first level characters rolling in there, you're going to do better than if you have 4. But apparently in this, it's like, no, if you have fewer characters, you are in a better position, and so we must artificially make it more difficult by pre-weakening the tower. Why is that? Where'd
They
that come
actually
from?
say why, because at least in my copy
How'd
of
I
it,
miss that?
it's in the appendix. Page 118, alternatives to the tower. In general, a dread game is based on a casualty after every 35 to 55 pulls, generally near the lower numbers for beginning groups and gradually increasing with experience. Jenga Tower is 54 blocks. 35 to 55 pulls. So it's like a guaranteed death, I guess. If you go through the entire Jenga Tower, you're eventually going to knock it over. Like, you can only pull so many blocks. You can also have to be asked to make multiple pulls if you're trying to do something very difficult. Like, if you say your character is, wears glasses, and then their glasses get knocked off and you're trying to shoot a monster in the distance, obviously, before it can, curse you or kill you somehow. That would obviously require 2 or even 3 pulls. There's a real interesting design assumption that, like, after so many tasks are resolved, there is going to be a death. It is only a matter of time. Or at least that's sort of implicit in the design of Dread.
And everyone knows it because the tower is getting weaker and weaker and more precarious.
Visibly teetering.
And there's a time element as well, because they suggest making a player pull a block roughly every 5 minutes or so, and then they suggest that a session is 3 to 4 hours. Which is fine for role-playing games of around 2005, but as time has gone on, sessions have, reduced in I think as people get older. Certainly, I don't play for much more than 2.5 hours at a time these days. But Jenga doesn't work without a certain number of blocks in the tower. So it's a logistical constraint of trying to make it work, trying to zip it along, even with a different player count, which is why you do the pull some blocks out pre-pulls if you've got a lower player count. It is a problem. The timing, I think, that somebody is going to die at a certain point, and at the same time you've got to get through the blocks at a certain speed. And if you've got a group who are playing really cautiously and doing stuff, really sensibly, then it is possible for GM Fiat to throw some heavy stuff at them to make sure that they're pulling more, that life gets harder for them. It is a structural problem, I think, with some Dread adventures. A good GM can get past it. But at the same time, we're talking about, essentially almost the literary structure, the narrative structure of role-playing adventures, when what we're really talking about is this genius mechanic. Dread was the first of, I believe, only 2 games I know of, certainly 2 prominent games, to use Jenga. And I'm going to digress briefly about Jenga here. People think about Jenga as if it was a folk game, because for a lot of people it's been around as long as they've been gaming, and they kind of assume that it's always been around, or it's been around since the 50s, or maybe even earlier. And it hasn't. It was invented in 1983. Yes, by a woman called Leslie Scott, who I know, who was a guest on my other podcast, Everybody Wins, of course.
If you're playing the drinking game at home, you're now 2 drinks in.
That's my name drop. Dread is actually dedicated to Leslie Scott. For me, the 3 most important words in the book are on page 2, and it just says for Leslie Scott. They pay respect, and I'll come back to that. But yeah, she was not successful. She self-published it in the UK, didn't do terribly well, got picked up in Canada by a medium-sized distributor, and then a brother of a friend of hers formed a company to sell the right. They thought they could do quite well with it in America without telling her that they'd actually already had a serious offer from a large toy distributor, Irwin's, I believe. This is all. She's written a book called About Jenga, which is basically details not only the history of Jenga, but also her life as an entrepreneur and a saleswoman. She used to work for Intel. She is a fascinating woman. But essentially, she no longer owns or controls the rights to Jenga, though she still does receive royalties on it. And she is still working in the games industry. She used to run a company called Oxford Games, which still exists, doing family and party games, primarily in the UK, and is now actually researching the nature of play. I'm really glad that Dread does pay proper respect to Jenga and talk about it. When they mention Jenga, they use the little trademark R in a circle thing. They talk about it as a trademark of Hasbro. They are quite definite that if you're playing this, you should be playing it with a copy of Jenga, not Tumbling Towers or whatever generic version of Jenga. Well, and there are two reasons for that. Sorry, I'm on a tirade now. There are two reasons for that. First of all, Jenga is very, very carefully manufactured. The blocks are not all the same. They are milled in such a way that they are microscopically different in thickness. So when you build a Jenga tower, some of the blocks will slide out easily and some of them will stick, and that's by design. Most of the knockoffs don't do that. There is a physical advantage to playing it with proper Jenga because proper Jenga is made differently. The other one is, if you're working in the games industry and you are taking not just a mechanic that someone else has developed, but an actual physical product and saying you should use this, then, pay respect to other people who are working in the games industry. Leslie is still alive, still working, as I said. And it is checking that is as easy as going to Wikipedia. And the other game that uses Jenga, which is Star-Crossed, Alex Roberts' game of star-crossed lovers and doomed relationships, which takes the idea of Dread and basically advances it to being a two-person co-op game where the tower represents your relationship, your potentially doomed relationship between two people who shouldn't be in love, but are because you're different species or you're Romeo and Juliet or whatever it is. They used pictures of Jenga in their Kickstarter, and you could tell it was Jenga because they were actually using branded Jenga bricks, and they said Jenga on the side. But then as part of the Kickstarter, they offered a handmade mahogany tumbling bricks tower as an additional backer level. How
do you feel about this, James?
I'm fucking furious about this. I'm still very, very angry about this because, it's if you're working in the games industry, show some respect to your fellow designers. I don't care. The other thing about Jenga is it sold 80 million copies. And yes, Leslie's on royalties. It's not a huge royalty, but she's done very nicely off that. But we should not say, there is no cutoff for success. You don't say, oh no, you've made enough money out of your blisteringly original, massively successful product. You get no more money. It's okay to rip you off now. No, it doesn't work that way. You respect the designers or you don't. The designers of Dread show proper respect for Jenga, and I'm afraid to say Starcross doesn't.
This fascinates me. I had no clue about the history of Jenga. I always assumed that it was a folk game that had been around for thousands of years, that, Moses could have played Jenga. It was this cultural artifact like chess that we didn't know its source, and it's from the 80s, like Kaja Gugu, and so I'm a little bit stunned. Wow,
yeah,
wow.
Hasbro didn't get hold of it until 1987. It was originally Milton Bradley under there. And as I say, Leslie is lovely. Leslie, I spoke to her about Dread and Starcrossed. She had never actually heard of them until I told her about them this week.
She'd never heard of Dread? Wow.
She had never. Well, she's not a role player, but despite the fact that the book is dedicated to her, so I have arranged for her to get copies. I'm very interested to see what she says. If there's an opportunity to actually play it with her, then I am first in the queue.
Wow. Right. I can't imagine. Do you know if she's very good at Jenga? Is she,
she's gotta be. Ross, come on! I'm giving you a mulligan on that question.
No, I'm legit, because a lot of game designers are terrible at the games they make. Very designing a game, being good at playing the game are very two different skills, and I would be very curious about that. But that's very cool. I would love to hear how she experiences the.
Yeah, we'll have to follow up as if we are journalists.
We could do an end of season follow up.
There we go. Yeah. Cool. It's too bad we can't do Dread as our season actual play. That would be a little hard to do.
But yeah.
Well, we can all get VR headsets, and that's how we'll do it. Yeah.
if you want to get a little bit artsy and a little bit fartsy, you can say that this is a feature and not a bug. That this is a game that you can't abstract out over Discord. And that's the only way I played recently. And I miss the face-to-face reading people's expression, reading their body language, all the small parts of immediacy. And I'm like, and yeah, they've created a game that you can't cheat that. You can't avoid it. You are going to be in the room with these people and their Dorito breath, and I think that'll enrich the experience. Not the Dorito breath specifically, but the immediacy.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree. It's visceral. And when it falls over, I mean, it is, despite being comparatively recent, it's the granddaddy of stacking games. You know, before that, there was stuff like Plunk, and there was Spillikins or Pickup Sticks, depending on where you're from in the world. But in terms of the thing that actually made a tower that then falls down with this glorious crash, Jenga is very much the great antecedent of a lot of those other, you know, and before that there was you know, building blocks that most of us had as kids, but they were a toy very much. There was not a game associated with them.
You cried when they fell over because your older brother had kicked them.
Yes, and your glorious construction fell apart. There is that sense of tragedy, but at the same time, it's glorious. That moment of catharsis as they hit the table and just scatter with that wonderful noise. And,
man, I'm wondering if this says something deeper about horror as a genre, because I've been writing and working in horror for decades now, and I still have a hard time articulating, well, what's fun about this, Greg? Why did you want to write this thing where these appealing people undergo these horrific experiences leading to this vastation revelation that destroys their personalities, and that's a good time for you? And I have to just, you know, stammer and fall back on, well, it's a catharsis. So maybe the Jenga collapse and having it be done with. And it's like, well, now it's done and I don't have to anticipate it any further. Has lessons for the larger understanding and enjoyment of horror media.
Well, it's also the anticipation is 2/3 of it, right? Like every time it is your turn, you feel like a sympathetic tension to what your character's experiencing, because obviously something is happening where if they fail, they could meet a bad end. And then watching other players do it, like you get to see, like, because there's part of you's like, well, if they falls over for them, then we rebuilt the tower and it's safer for me. So I kind of, I'm, you know, we're all on the same team, right? But I kind of want them to have the tower fall over on their turn, not mine. Like there's this kind of musical chairs.
We're cooperating, but some of us are cooperating more than others.
And when it does fall, there's that glorious sense of it didn't happen to me.
Yeah,
it happened to someone else, and that drives so much horror cinema. Certainly, I'm sitting safely here at home watching other people getting butchered.
Oh God, that was my experience of reading Adam Neville's The Ritual specifically, because it's set with these, even before like the bad stuff happens, because these guys who really aren't ready for this degree of outdoorsmanship have gone hiking and camping north of the Arctic Circle. And they get screwed due to their own lack of skill and competence. And so they don't know where they are. One of them's kind of hurt and isn't walking well. They're running low on food. They have no way to contact anyone. And I distinctly remember the delightful sensation of sitting on the sofa with a big, with a cold beer and a giant thing of hot, fresh buttered popcorn going, oh, these poor bastards. Oh, are they going to eat their last granola bar now or save it for breakfast? Sucks to be them. Chomp, 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 chomp. It was exquisite.
I have to say, while we're recording this, I have the Wikipedia page for Jenga up, and there's an animated GIF of a Jenga tower collapsing. Yeah. And I've just been watching it over and over, and it's glorious. Every single time it falls is the thing of beauty.
I think that's the key to Dread. The fact that it can create this kind of like intensity in a role playing experience with very little setup or lead time, right? Like a lot of times I know the best role playing experiences have required finding the particular people being on the exact same wavelength and like weaving a story and building characters and being collaborative, and that takes time. You know, you have to find the right people that mesh with what you're trying to do. And even if it's a one shot, that takes time to figure out, oh, I know what this player is about. I know how to craft an experience to them.
Flashing back to Apocalypse World and Baker just saying straight out, oh yeah, this will get good around session 4 or 5.
Right. But like Dread is kind of, you know, I've been watching this cooking show recently where Gordon Ramsay is one of the judges, and you know, he and the other judges keep saying, oh, we want an elevated cooking experience, we want an elevated dish. And I feel like this is an attempt to do as a shortcut to elevated role playing, because when Dread works, it works well, as we're talking about, because like there is this instant buy-in from the players. It's a game that you can teach to anybody almost. It doesn't require them to even have ever played it. It's a good first role-playing game, right? Because like making a character is just like, tell us about a fictional person and what they're about. Like there's no stats, there's no numbers, there's no formulas, there's nothing except for like fictional storytelling. Like, who is this person? As we haven't even gotten into it, but like, and because of Jenga being a physical thing of like having to physically move and understanding instantly, if you knock the tower over, you die, or the bad thing happens. So it doesn't always work, but it has a very low buy-in. It's something you can teach to people easily. But like, there are times that Dread doesn't work, and that's often because of the Jenga element too. Because I there have been times where I played it where like one player was way better at Jenga than the rest of us, and so it's like, well, nobody died because Jason here was just like, oh yeah, 3 pulls, sure, no problem. All right, do another 3 pulls. Yeah, no, I'm not even gonna kill the monster this time. I'm just gonna flip him off and moon him. And yeah, 3 pulls, no problem. Yeah, all right.
How is it possible to be that good at Jenga?
Well, some people are just really good at it, and and that can happen. Like there are times obviously where like somebody messes up in the first 10 minutes and they have some advice on like what to do.
Much more relatable.
That happens too. And so like when you get to those sweet spot, but like sometimes that doesn't happen because it doesn't click with the group for whatever reason. But like it's a more reliable way to get to an elevated role-playing experience than most games would do for a single evening in terms of it. Yeah. So I think that's why Dread is such a great game, because it's a formula to get you to a better role-playing experience, and it doesn't always work, but when it does, boy, does it work.
All right, here's a question then, Ross. If you see this as the royal road to getting to what you... And I'm not sure I know what you mean by an elevated experience other than just paying really intense attention to the game. But if you train yourself on Dread to enter that intense mindset, is that going to carry over when you play a different game? Is someone who has gotten it because Dread handheld them to it going to be able... Is that person going to be better equipped to enter that same intense, or as you put it, elevated state with a different rule set? And I don't know what answer I believe in this, but it's a curious question.
Well, for me, an elevated role-playing experience is one that is intensely satisfying and often, or not always, but usually would make you think like after the game. Like these are the games that you talk about years later of the time, and these are the times like
this is why we play.
Yeah, this is why we play. I think Dread actually doesn't, because it's such a different experience, because like it's basic, aside from the rule set, it's just free-form role-playing, right, for the most part. We should probably explain some of the how the game does what it does by talking about character creation, because it's so different than most of the role-playing games we've talked about, which is you just answer a questionnaire about your character. You just like, and it varies per scenario, right? The GM can custom craft it, but there's pre-built adventures that have questionnaires, and you just like, all right, what are their hobbies? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their dark secrets? And it's 10 to 15 questions. Yeah.
It strongly encourages you to ask very leading questions as the GM. So it's, what is it that your wife does that you can only make her stop by choking her would be a horrific example, but absolutely kosher under Dread rules. It's like, what made you a pill addict?
Yeah.
Yes. And the other thing is every player gets a different questionnaire. They don't all get the same questionnaire, which is great because you can customize them. You can make sure that you can build interrelationships. How do you feel about being the youngest in the family? That's a great question because it establishes status. It establishes that probably,
history.
Exactly. All of that stuff. It's really nicely done as a system of character generation. And group character generation as well, even though it's weird. It's group character generation that you can do without being in the same room as people. But because you know something from a well-crafted questionnaire, and they go into some depth about how you should write these things, you start to understand something about the other players, even though you may not have seen their completed character sheets.
Like I was saying, like most of the time you're just doing this free-form role-playing, where there's no rules, there's no mechanics to argue, like simple procedural things, not life-threatening things. There's no making investigation skill checks unless it's like a life-threatening thing, right? Like you right. Just know what you do, you don't like.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much point. There was some of the examples in the book seemed weird to me. There was the Latin book. Can you take a poll to translate this book from Latin? And then the author's like, well, what does it mean if you collapse the tower while reading the Latin book? And I'm like, well, Vince Baker would say yes or take a poll, and that you probably shouldn't take a poll unless there is a meaningful risk of removal, which goes against the every 5 minutes and
I mean, if it's a supernatural thing, the book is obviously cursed or something like that. Or
there's another one where he's talking about baking a cake, and I'm like, you shouldn't have to take pulls. Yeah. You should just have a cake.
Yeah. Again, I think it's betraying its age. It's betraying the fact that yes, there have been. It's still on its first edition. This is almost 20 years old. It occasionally gets minor tweaks and updates. Usually when Nat spots another typo, he said in an email. But it's had no major revisions since then. And, 2005 and stuff, the Forge was still going. An awful lot of what we just take for granted as the way people role play these days, particularly within the indie scene, these rules were still being established. People were still pushing through
figuring it out.
The 256-page dice-heavy games of the 90s, and pushing that undergrowth out of the way to get to the clearing, the clear vision beyond. And I suspect some of it is a legacy of that. That it wasn't the sense of only do something if there's a genuine risk, if the meaningful decisions. But one thing I do think it's very forward about, and this is something I mentioned, I think, in season 1, or a question I asked in season 1 and nobody knew the answer. The first game in which the GM is not involved in any of the Jenga Tower is not a randomizer. That's another thing. But the modern trope of the GM doesn't roll the dice.
Yeah,
which is
player facing,
very player facing. The GM does not pull blocks out of the Jenga Tower. It's only the players who do that. And I can't think of a game before this that did that. And yes, it's not dice. And the purpose of a Jenga brick is very different to the purpose of rolling a dice. But that whole idea of the GM tells the story, but it's the players that take the risk-reward stuff.
Yeah.
I think it may have started here.
Well, tell the story could give a false impression, though, because this is not a railroady kind of situation.
No.
It can't. Because, it's inherently, it's not a randomizer, but it is inherently unpredictable as as you're taking your pull, you're hoping you're gonna do okay, but there's always that chance that you're just gonna sneeze.
Jenga does be like that. But like, if I can go on a slight tangent, like I think the freeform, like the thing is also, from reading people who play games of Dread, that it does seem to be long for, like as mentioned earlier, long for a single player one shot, like 4 hours or more. And so like, and if you're only making like 30 to 50 pulls, one every 5 minutes or whatever, that means there's a lot besides pulling, like, and that's just going to be, like I said, free form role playing. And I think that's sort of the key to a lot of people's enjoyment of role playing, which is, free of mechanics, just talking in character and trying to figure out where this collaborative story is going. And I think like a lot of people who play Dungeons and Dragons are really just free form role playing with an occasionally remembering to roll a D20 or something like that. But
Before we started recording, we were talking about the Dying Breath game I was running and how happy all the players were that they didn't have to roll dice to get into a conflict, where they're like, okay, yes, we de-escalated. Hell yeah. Nobody shot anybody. Yeah. And they were very pleased with this, and I took that as a sign that I was running the horror game well. I'm like, good. They are scared to engage the mechanics. Booyah.
And I think that's the Dread recognize. Like, I think that's what the designers did, is they recognize like one really good mechanical system that has has a psychological trepidation associated with it is enough. You don't need to have anything else for a role-playing game, because like we can just role play. It's just playing pretend. It's just playing imagination like you did as a kid.
But better.
Yeah, and so sometimes less is more. And I think and the problem, of course, being when that doesn't work out. Like sometimes, like I mentioned, sometimes somebody's disproportionately good or bad at Jenga, because the game is built on this tension of like 30 to 50 pulls in, someone is going to die. There is like approaching this like event horizon of death. And
yes,
and if you don't reach that, because like when I run role playing games, I don't want my player characters to die in the first third of the game, maybe at the halfway point, and definitely in the last third. Like that's like you want all the deaths to be towards the end, because like if somebody dies early on, well, it's hard, especially in Dread, it's hard for someone to make a new character, right? Because of the questionnaire and the interlinked relationships. Like if it's, we're going to spend all night playing this game, it's going to be 4 hours. Oh, Bob died in the first hour. Sorry, Bob. See you next week.
I mean,
somebody makes you jump on your first or second pull. It's whoa. And there is a little note in there that says, maybe want to, invent a close friend or have a close friend that you've mentioned in your questionnaire. Oh, it's them. They come in as your backup PC. But yeah, you're right. It's not a satisfactory solution.
Well, and it's part of the uniqueness of Dread that I don't like, that I would normally hate the idea that, because of this, as a mechanical consequence, you're done playing. Hit the showers, better luck next time. I guess the other guy just wanted it more. Once you drop that tower, you're sitting on you're on your phone. You are a spectator at best. At worst, you're like, oh well, tell me how it played out. I guess I'm going home. So, but I'm like, but how else would you do it? And with Dread specifically, I'm like, yeah, it's an exception. It feel any other way other than it drops and you die seems wrong. So doing this with any other genre, I'm like, it probably wouldn't work so well.
I think that's probably why it recommends 5 players plus a GM, right? Because then like it's distributed, right? Any one player is not going to be making pulls, that many pulls. So like the chance of any individual character dying is pretty low until we get towards the sweet spot, the narrative, where the tension's really raised and like everything's really hitting it. Another thing that just occurred to me is Dread is one of the one problem with role-playing games as a structure, as a game type is, and this is not unique to role-playing games, but like common to role-playing games and board games, is that when it's not your turn, you're on your phone. You're not paying attention. And some games it's not, war games obviously are not, because like you have all these miniatures, you got to see what your opponent's doing, and so that's not a problem. But like in Dread, it's entertaining to watch the other players sweat through it, right? Like to go through a poll. Like that's half the fun of Jenga, is seeing the other players potentially fuck up. Are they gonna fuck up? Oh man.
And we're back to the warm popcorn and the cold beer.
Oh,
that tower's pretty rickety. Munch. Oh, he's fucked. Oh, remember that poor bastard.
But I know Dread is the one game that like I have some players, my regular playing group, that like if it's not their turn, they're gonna pull out their phone, and I'm gonna like, hey, come, hey, back to Earth,
Focus up.
Yeah, but again, Dread, two things. Dread lacks that conventional structure of, going around the group and whose turn is it to play. Because it's so freeform, because it's so loosey-goosey, I think it does assume a familiarity with the structure of how role-playing games work. There's not a huge amount.
Because there is a cost to even success. Even when you succeed at your pull, the tower has become more dangerous. Even your guy, Ross, with the silken hands, who is a Jenga ninja, even he, every time he succeeds, has just made it harder to succeed next time. It's a death spiral. Something I was going to say with this, I've got to play an unpublished game recently, and I don't know how much of it I can talk about, but it had a pretty interesting mechanic where whenever you succeed at a task, the ability you used to succeed at it diminishes. So you get tired. And I'm like, this is really good for a gritty, suspenseful game, because I beat every roll in that session. My dice were hot, but I was still sweating bullets because I'm like, oh shit, is this the one where I fuck it up and I don't have any gas in my tank at the end game when I need it? So it's, you are doing something right when you have people scared to pick up their dice in a horror game.
Yes. But just to jump back a moment or two, these two problems, the one of players being disengaged when it's not their turn, when they are not active within the game, and the other thing of players being knocked out, these are problems that board games were very familiar with half a century ago. And coming out of the German school, these things have been systematically designed out of modern board games. This is the Euro School of Design, which I go into in some depth in my book, Everybody Wins, now available in the Americas as well as across Europe.
Oh, yes, I have to get that. What was the title again, James?
Everybody Wins, 4 decades.
By James Wallace, and that's spelled Wallis.
That would be correct, yes.
Do you have the ISBN?
Not off the top of my head. But yeah, it's a solved problem in board games, and to see it coming up in role-playing games is kind of interesting. Because in most it's not, because you'd create a new character. And we talked about Ars Magica a while ago now, actually. And Ars Magica, of course, has the troop play and the pool of characters that you can just grab a new character out of, or switch between characters should anything happen to your main, or even your less main, whichever character you happen to be playing at the time.
Your main or your main gauche.
Oh, very good. Respect to the joke. So again, I think this is a little bit of Dread betraying its age. I think there are mechanics out there they could use to ease that. At the same time, you want that sense of risk, that sense of potential catastrophic loss, or horror doesn't work.
If I am playing a one-off slasher movie role-playing game with Dread, I accept that permadeath And, no 13th age like fight on in spirit. Nope. It's just, you're done. And after the stress of the draws and the catharsis, if we want to call it that, the release of having the tower collapse, you're probably ready to just go sit on the sofa and fan yourself and process what you just been through. So...
no, I agree. I think like that again, when Dread works, it works really well. Like, but it's harder to get working, I think, sometimes.
I mean, the definition of genius is exempt from the rules that constrain normal, a normal exercise of its type.
Yeah.
And that's the genius of Dread, yo.
Yep.
It's not like them other games. It can do this, and it can get away with it because it's Dread.
I think also, like, the reason why Dread is, my copy is like 170 pages, and like 130 of them are advice, basically, or at least 100 of them are advice. Not counting the starting scenarios, or because there's a lot of heavy lifting by the GM, right, to establish the tone and the atmosphere, which is pretty much, for most games, the true, but like Dread recognizes, you really, if you're starting this as your first RPG, or one of your, if you've only played D&D and you're trying to run Dread, you probably need some advice on like how to do horror, because of pacing and timing and atmosphere are so important in order to get that elevated experience, as I said. One thing also I really like about Dread, and I've certainly done several times, and I've heard of other people doing, is it's such an once you understand the concept of Dread, I've done one thing I like doing in my games is doing sessions in a campaign where it's actually, this session we're doing it in a different rule system. Like one thing I've done.
You pervert!
No, Caleb. It's become a running joke.
You sick twist.
So like in Eclipse Phase, you're loading into this virtual reality, the Simul Space game, in order to go find somebody to talk to them. Well, this one is a horror game, so we're going to be using Dread for this session. And if you get killed in this Dread session, you're kicked out of the video game, and you can't talk to the contact or the witness or whatever. So at least one of you has to make it to the witness and ask him the questions while you're playing this video game. So I really like. And it would be so easy to reskin it to like, you're fighting mental control over this, powerful magical artifact in your D&D game. And so you're going to use Dread for that. That's going to represent your psychic, battle of wills, to control this powerful artifact.
Did you ever read The Stress of Her Regard by Tim Powers? There's a great scene, and it's just the setup for it. And the setting of The Stress of Her Regard this was in On Stranger Tides, which has very, very little to do with the movie of the same name.
Other than the title, it's bizarre.
Which is a great title, but okay. But it's the most serious magical duels are always fought in the memories of one of the combatants. And there's no explanation for why this is, but this guy is just in this, winds up in this guy's memory of, it's his most horrible, humiliating memory, and he's trying to re-edit it to make it that, no, I was always right. I was always smart. I always, everything I did was the right thing to do. It was proper. It was correct. And there's sort of this implication that, if he succeeds at this, all of the crippling insecurities and, prejudices that have been holding him back are going to vanish, and he's just going to be unstoppable. So I'm like, that's where you could bring your Dread Tower in.
Yeah.
If you want to switch up rules, like, I don't know, who hurt you, Ross?
My demand for novelty has, I'm just so jaded from playing so many games over the years. I just, yes, we shall play a different role-playing game in this role-playing game. And I shall have...
very true!
Bring out the gladiators. Yes.
Have you ever done the fake out, where you start in one game system and then abruptly reveal that actually you're playing a different. There was one in an example in one of the Discord channels I follow. It might even have been ours, in which someone was describing a game. I can't remember what they started out in, but the first session, everybody dies brutally, and he goes, "Ha!" and whips out a copy of Wraith. Yeah, you're all playing dead people now. Yeah. Which is brilliant. And I could see Dread, because it's considered
if they're okay with it.
Thing. Yeah, everybody dies or goes mad horribly. That could really lead into something interesting, whether it's Wraith, whether it's Unknown Armies, I don't know.
Anything, you could easily, anything where life and death stakes are at hand, and there's like this build up where it's fine, and then suddenly it's not fine. And so there's a lot of ways you could apply that. I think and this sort of leads into like probably the single greatest thing about Dread is actually its impact on game design. Like, it came out in 2005, won the Gold Emmy in 2006, but like since then, like if you're a tabletop role-playing game, you're at all read about anything online, if you don't have your head in a hole, like you eventually hear about Dread and you realize that role-playing games don't have to follow the paradigm of character sheets and rolling dice and hit points and armor class. Like, so many games have been published that are like, oh wait, we can do something entirely different. We can decide what a role-playing game is. And it's still topping the list of like games that have unique mechanics. Literally, I just found one on Comic Book Resources, like 10 tabletop games with entirely unique mechanics from 2021, and the number one on the list is Dread, and number two is a game called This Discord Has Ghosts in It, which is a game that uses Discord, the messaging app we're actually using right now, but like games with cards. I played a game that is When You're Here, Your Family, where you have to play it at an Olive Garden. And
breadstick based mechanics.
No, it's actually just telling like a generational story. It's like with every every time a new dish is brought out, like you have to change it, so it's like a generational thing you're telling. So it's a bit like The Quiet Year in a lot of ways, but with breadsticks instead of a map. But yeah, I think that's the people. It opened up your people's eyes to seeing like role-playing games can do whatever you want them to do. You can just decide what they are, and a lot. I think there have been other people experimenting with board games as for their role-playing games. But so I love Dread for nothing else for that impact. Like guess what? You don't have to follow in the footsteps of Gary Gygax. You can do something different. Yeah.
All right. So and usually it would be Ross who would be dragging us back on topic, forcing the third drink. But the questions: what does it do? How does it do that? How is it played, and why is it played that way? I mean, we've been kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
And what does it do, and how does it do that? I think we've got that covered. What it does is creates this terrible, visceral, tangible, physical, collective tension through the and how it does that is Jenga.
Yeah, when it works,
the central focus. Yeah,
when it works. Yeah. Now, how much of this is a stress on one shots? Because it talks about doing a campaign, but I'm like, I don't see it. I don't think it would be that great for a campaign.
No, I mean, you could do it as basically, the way I would do it is like a series of linked one-shots. So like horror movie sequel. So it's like, all right, we got attacked by a slasher and some of us survived, and the slasher's gone. All right. Oh, the slasher's back and he's killing us. All right. Well, we killed him this time for sure. Oh God, he came back from hell, and so, Friday the 13th, and then like building up into like finally figuring out a way to kill the monster for dead for reals this time, or all the characters are killed. So like there's no character progression, because how could there be?
Right.
There's just character change. Like, I've been scarred by what happened.
I mean, you could have character progression where it's And I guess they address this where it's like, oh, because so-and-so punched his way through an icy lake and climbed out and survived. I'm not gonna make him pull to resist cold. He's pretty cold resistant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the on a purely logistical note, the problem of running a campaign is you have to break for each session after the tower has fallen, because otherwise you have to maintain a Jenga tower in the same state for a week until the next game
or
session.
just accept that at every new session the tower is renewed.
Yeah,
or
so
renewed, but maybe again make more pulls every time it's reset like that. Yeah.
I mean, that would, although that would lead to super conservative play, because it's like, okay, we just have to get through the next 3 hours without doing anything.
Yeah, they do talk about that. Is the one mechanical issue. Players can always choose not to pull, right? And then
yes, it's an automatic fail. You fail,
and you get super gun shy.
But you only die.
But you survive.
But you only die if you make the tower fall over. So if you're like, the example they use in the book is. You're trying to disarm a bomb and you refuse to make a pull to disarm the bomb. So what happens? Well, you can say the bomb goes off, but you dived out of the way. Now you're wounded, or something like that. But yeah, that's like a social etiquette thing, right? It's like, this is a game about making Jenga pulls, man. Like, you got to pull, otherwise we should just stop playing because you clearly don't want to play the game. Like, you have to engage with mechanics, man. So.
Yeah. I mean, I could see there. I would, I would be okay with some people saying no. It's not worth pulling. But if they refuse to pull at all, yeah.
I mean, occasionally, obviously, yeah. Sorry.
I would house rule it and say you can skip one pull or you can skip 2 pulls, but after that you have to pull.
You're hardcore, James. Dang.
Yeah.
Well, But one thing we've not mentioned is you can push. You can deliberately topple the tower. Which is a self-sacrificing act of your player character. You will automatically succeed in the action, but your character is immediately removed from the game. And that's great. That's about the only kind of variant rule to this very pure structure that the game provides. And I think it fits so perfectly. It's
the end of Underwater.
Mm-hmm.
It's the end of so many movies.
Yeah, the heroic sacrifice is a trope
to save everyone else. And a glorious thing to do. And I think that's, it was one of those, I love those moments as you're reading through a rule book and you hit something, you just go, yep, that's bang, ping, you absolutely nailed that. It's just on top of the genius of the core mechanic, that moment.
My moment like that was when he's like, leave room for surprises. And the authors are constantly saying, yes, do not try to direct this wild horse you're on the back of. Just go with the flow, baby. And I'm like, yes, that's why we do this, because it is wild in a way that nothing else is.
Yeah.
These are the games that you cannot predict.
Yes. And it's also worth making a point. You go, but surely maybe your narrative would have no sense. Maybe it doesn't. It doesn't matter. It honestly doesn't matter, because the players are not observing the narrative. They are participating within it. They are inside the story, not outside.
Yeah.
And while I'm plugging my stuff this episode, I have this card game, Once Upon a Time, which is a very short, fast, silly card game about telling fairy stories collaboratively, trying to be the person who finishes them. And it's huge fun to play. And you come out feeling, we did this creative thing. We created a story, and it had characters, and it had acts, and it came to an end. What was the story? Oh, it was nonsense. Objectively, the story is never a good story. But while you're playing it, while you're within it, it's hugely engrossing. And most role-playing games are exactly the same. You write them down as stories, they don't work. But while you're playing them, because it's you're not watching, John Q B-list star or C-list star, with makeup on or, splattered over his face or whatever. It's you or your avatar. It's a completely different form of storytelling. I bang on about this way too much, about, games are the one true interactive form, but, it's the form in which the creators are also the audience. We are creating these stories for ourselves as an ephemeral thing. They exist once and then only in the memory. And that's incredibly powerful. And I think Dread really leans into that and takes advantage of that and amplifies all the good points of that. When it works, it is incredibly powerful.
So if you haven't played Dread, this is a game I can definitely recommend. Because, as we said, the rules are very easy to pick up, and get some friends
and
over.
The advice is good. It's worth reading.
Yeah, even if you don't run Dread, if you want advice on running a horror game, because the 6 types of horror, like how to build suspense, how to emphasize theme and tone and atmosphere. Great stuff. Hold
your nose and just think of England every time Will pops up.
Yep. So thank you all so much for listening to this episode. Well, actually, before we go, any other final thoughts?
I think we've covered it pretty well. If you haven't bought Dread, buy Dread. Encourage this kind of wildly inventive, off the norm creation.
Yeah, there's a reason that this little black and white RPG with really, I'm not going to say bad artwork, because I think the artwork kind of fits the tone of the game, but it is not. It is the opposite of polished. It's minimal. Literally, it scribbles. Yeah. It scribbles.
Yeah. A lot of the art is not that great.
There's a reason it's an adamantium level seller on drive-through. I mean, for me, there are many things interesting about it, but for me, looking at what it strips away from most RPGs, simply by going no dice, no cards, no randomizers, but it's not diceless either. There's still this determiner in the middle of the table that is the focus of everyone's attention. It's an interesting lens to look at other games, what we think of as the breadth of role-playing games, and realize how dictated they are, how structured they are around their randomizers and their core mechanics. And it is a step outside. It's not a traditional role-playing game that happens to use Jenga. It is something else. And the way that something else changes the nature and the structure of the stories that it tells, I think more people could do with stepping away from dice and cards. And I'm aware that there are dice and cards are two entire industries on their own, and people do love them. But there's so much one can do with the concept of role-playing games that is not dependent on dice and cards and all the mechanics and the structure that follows naturally from them. And I think if you're looking to start, if you've got ideas for a game that is something different, but you're not quite sure what to do with it, Dread is a really good place to start thinking about the possibilities.
Yeah.
An avenue to think about the things that you were unaware you weren't thinking about.
Exactly. Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
A good note to end the episode. So in our next episode, we will be talking about Tales from the Loop, based on a very popular series of science fiction artwork, and now, an Amazon Prime TV show.
Whatever, man.
Single season. Yeah.
Single season. Kids on bike with robots in Scandinavia or America. Definitely a fun and interesting game to talk about. But I would like to thank
Dan Williamson. Thank you, Dan Williamson.
I would also like to thank Evan G. Cullen. Thank you so much for supporting this pocket. All right. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you later.